Hello, everybody. It is March 23rd, and this is the OLM Working Group and Issue Triage meeting. I'm going to share the agenda. Share screen. We're going to share this Firefox window. All right, can somebody confirm that they're able to see the view?
Yep.
Okay, so OLM V1 upgrades UX. This is an initiative being led by Todd Short. He's going to be presenting this at the next upstream community meeting. So we will be getting his doc out early next week so that people have time to look over it prior to the meeting. But it's just going to kind of spell out what the baseline upgrade experience is. And in fact, we might even try and get the doc out today. It's just that he's on vacation. I wanted to give him an opportunity to okay that, but maybe we'll just go ahead and share it because it's pretty ready to be shared in my opinion. Okay. Next talking point. So we had a working group poll. The poll was targeted at finding a time that everybody could meet. And as everybody might know, we do have some interested attendees in Germany and the Pacific Northwest and North America. So that's a very diverse time zone. There's very limited times where everybody can meet up. And based on the poll results, we had a tie between Tuesday, Thursday, and Monday, I think it was. And I was going to propose that we set it to Tuesday, because if we do it every Monday, most teams have sprints planning Mondays at the proposed time, which would be 8 a.m. Pacific Northwest time, 5 p.m. CET time, and I think that makes it 11 o'clock for people on the Eastern Standard Time. So are there any major objections to moving the meeting time to Tuesdays at 11 Eastern? Okay, doesn't seem like we have any major objections. I'm just going to mention that meeting will be moved to 8 a.m. Well, I'll just say 11 a.m. EST. Perfect. And I believe the next line item was submitted by Ankita and Varsha. Would you like to present on that?
Sure. I can start the presentation if that's what we want to do right now.
Yeah, I think we'll just do this all in line for now.
Okay.
And, it might be helpful for individuals that aren't fully aware where the project is right now to get a quick update on the work that you've been doing.
Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yep, I can see.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay then. Hello everyone. We're going to demo the added support for the catalog source API on the operator controller. So we've already had a demo of what an end-to-end install looks like for the operator controller before. But last time we were using a hard-coded catalog source as its backing data source. So this time we've just updated the operator controller to watch for the OLM v0 catalog sources and to be able to use them as its data source for resolution. So I already have a cluster set up. And if we look at the deployments on cluster, we can see that we have both the operator controller and the v0 OLM both deployed on cluster. Now we need the OLM v0 so that the catalog sources that are created have associated pods with them that they can use to serve. Now we're going to be using this data source, this catalog source as our source to install from. And for that, we're going to use the Redis operator as our test operator to install. So if I go ahead and apply this, we can see that the operator object gets created. And looking at status, it says that the installation did succeed. And to check this, we can just look at the CRDs that get generated. And we can see that the associated CRDs for the Redis operator do get created. So it is more or less just an addition to the already existing operator controller install process that lets us support the OLM v0 resources that we have, so that in future when we have the sort of transition between OLM v0 and v1, that process will be a lot smoother for our users. And that's it for the demo. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah, I've got one, Ankita. So you're using like a test catalog. I'm curious if we could just like use, and I'm not asking you to do this right now, but I'm just curious if this would work if we just pulled off like the operator hub upstream catalog. Like is the expectation that like an off-the-shelf catalog would work just the same?
So there are some restrictions on what operators we can directly install with operator controller as of now, and it's mostly around the fact that we need all operators that are installed by operator controller to support the all namespaces mode, and that is not the case with every single operator on Operator Hub. So that is the reason why I've created a test catalog for demoing the install.
Okay, so it's about the contents of the catalog, but not the catalog itself.
Yes.
So any catalog, any catalog that exists out there will work, but some of the operator versions in that catalog won't because they don't support all namespaces or whatever. And those are all restrictions that are in RuckPack, right?
Yes. So the resolution will work, but the actual apply using RuckPack, that will fail. And yeah, what you said is absolutely right, Joe.
Awesome. Thanks, Ankita. So I don't think this is merged yet. Is there a plan to merge this?
It would depend on like one thing that I did call out is that for this to work, we do need the OLM v0 catalog operator running on cluster. So it's more or less a question of if this is support that we want to have, we want to enforce that in order for this component of the operator controller to work, we must also have OLM v0 running on cluster. Gotcha. If that's a requirement we're okay with, then that can merge, but otherwise.
Yeah, maybe we can take this offline, but I wonder if what we can do is in the operator controller, when it starts up, it can say like, hey, is the catalog source OLM v1 or OLM v0 CRD present? If so, like, okay, now go and stand up all of this extra stuff. If not, then I'm still going to work, but you know, I'm not going to use catalog sources, and I don't care if OLM v0 is there. But we can take that discussion off.
Yeah, that would be more or less just tying a catalog, tying a specific CRD to an entity source that we can use. So it would be a question of, do we want to have a single source kind for a single CRD type? So yeah.
I think there are probably a lot of ways we could tackle this, right? I think we definitely want to talk about that. I think right now, Ankita, when you install this, the default, the hard-coded stuff we had earlier is gone, right? Like that's not in the solution set of stuff that could be installed, right?
Yes.
Okay. there might be, so just spitballing really quick, there's like the opportunity to say like, hey, we have this hard-coded set and any catalog sources that we find. And then that way we could test this feature with CI by, installing OLM and then spinning up a catalog source, or, mocking it with fake status updates. There's a couple options we have there, right?
Yeah.
With an eventually statement. And then we could, I guess we use like, as part of the test prereq, it checks that the catalog source pod, we can point it to a pod and make it work. That's all not important. But the point is there's probably a few solutions we could do there. I think as long as somebody's still able to install OLM v0 out of the box and have have the ability to install an operator, I'm happy getting this merged. I think this is great. So fantastic job. Glad to hear that the only limitations are those imposed by Rockback. I think that's that's by design. And this was a fantastic demo. So thank you.
Thanks, Alex. If does anyone else have any more questions?
Yeah, I noticed that. So there's one catalog, and then when you created that operator CR, there was no mention of the source that it should be installed from. And I say that because one package can be offered by two different catalogs, right? So is this something that we're not thinking about for right now? Is this already there, or is this like something in the roadmap of operator controller that you can specify a source? But
I think as of now, we have priorities within catalogs that we can use, but the operator object itself is sort of agnostic of what catalog it's installing from. So that would need to be added as constraints later.
Okay. I also think that's like an interesting subject that like maybe even deserves its own sort of design thought and process. Because as Ankita was sort of going into this, I was thinking to myself, like, man, it might be kind of nice if like the cluster admin, like we've got all these, say we've got 10 different catalog sources on the cluster. It might be nice if the cluster admin could say like, for this particular package, only use this subset of those catalog sources. And if that subset is empty, then that means you can use all of them. So I think, Anik, that's a good question. We probably need to think about what sorts of APIs we want to give to cluster admins that let them be a little bit more prescriptive about where we resolve from. But it gets really interesting, I think, because you're resolving over like the entire set of all the operators. And so if one operator says resolve over this subset of the catalog sources, and another operator says resolve over this other set of catalog sources, is that possible? And if so, like what would that mean? So maybe it just means that like you can resolve over all, but you're only going to install this one from that catalog source or something like that. And I think that also then starts to touch and get in on some of the stuff that Todd is going to talk about with his install and upgrade sorts of ideas. So anyway, yes, I think that's a good question, something we need to talk about. I think we're sort of just hand waving right now and saying like, there is no API field to specify a catalog, and therefore we're just going to look at whatever's available. And I think that's what we all expect for now. But you're right, we're going to have to solve for that.
Okay. Yeah. While you were saying that, I realized that we didn't even. It looks different, or there's like a different thought process right now for tenancy too. So as a non-admin, I probably cannot say that I want this operator installed and for watching CRs in this namespace, right? So that means that what you just said of giving that option to cluster admins to, say that, okay, this package will come from this set of operators probably solves that, or probably takes care of, if a tenant requests for an operator to be installed, only install from package A or B and ignore package C or D. But I think what I'm getting at is like, you're right. I think there's a lot to think about. I just realized before we can say that, okay, we can include a field in operator CR.
Yeah, the other interesting question is, if the operator that you're looking at says it has dependencies, does this mean that you only want to resolve those dependencies from those catalogs, or is it just this one from those catalogs? Or maybe there's two separate fields, one for the dependencies and one for not. And then Todd's stuff gets into like, well, maybe there's just going to be a separate CR for the dependencies, and that's for you to specify it. So I think it's sort of a we don't know yet sort of thing, but yeah, something we need to think about.
Okay, are there any other questions that we want to address?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, you can just tell me if this isn't the right place. This is Joe Heisinger with IBM. And on this subject we were just talking about, I mean, we have some work ongoing here where we're looking at having catalogs per namespace kind of a thing to control, you know, the update graphs and things for potentially the same operators. So I'm just trying to get my head around how that might work without some way to indicate which catalog or something that those came from. So
if you're talking about OLMV1, then the new catalog source API is going to be cluster scoped because the operator installs are also at the cluster scope. So I think that simplifies and maybe helps answer your question, but it also maybe opens a new question.
yeah.
What about the tenancy thing? So that's the other thing we'll have to still work through.
Yeah,
Alan,
and we will be having those conversations both here and in the upstream Slack. So something we're trying to do is anytime anybody brings up a question that's related to OLMV1 or anything, at least within the Red Hat org, which many of us are a part of, where we are going to funnel all of our conversation upstream as much as we possibly can. And that's just got to be the normal. And if you frequent the channels, you're going to be able to see those communications. If you're coming to these meetings, and we'll look at the existing milestone before we conclude this meeting, just so that everybody knows what's actively being worked on. And what we'll probably do in these meetings as well is like propose the work that we're going to be working on in the next milestone. And, before you propose the work, where there's probably going to be a little bit of a design process, which again will be ran in an upstream manner. So you'll be able to look at it, see it, comment, and influence ultimately what we're going to go and do. And hopefully that will, manifest in a solution that you are going to be comfortable with using. Because I really want to see your perspective on all the stuff that we design.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I know we've been kind of absent, and we're trying to fix that. So
awesome. And one more thing, just as in the interest of being able to rapidly iterate, we'll probably be doing more ad hoc meetings that we'll try and give like at least a 3-hour window, okay? Where we say, hey, we're going to talk about this subject today. Do you want to jump on this call with us if it's going to be, done synchronously? Because some conversations are just easier to talk and spitball there. We'll hope to leave all those meetings with a quick doc or at least some meeting notes that we can send in Slack so that people that weren't able to attend are caught up. But we are really, really going to prioritize moving any and all conversation upstream so that you have the opportunity to be engaged with the community or to engage with us.
okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Are those Slack channels? I mean, are those listed somewhere, or anybody can get to those? Are they in the Kube namespace or workspace?
Right. So it's the hashtag OLM dev channel right now, which is where we're driving most of this conversation in the context of the OLMV1 work. It's a bit costly, isn't quite the word in terms of like creating a new channel with Kubernetes, right? Like they almost always do it for us. It's just it takes a moment. So I think there are instances where we may want to spin up a new channel, but for now, I would say let's just all look at the hashtag OLM dev channel for any OLMV1 development.
Yeah, and I would probably say like we need to, if we are going to spin up a new channel, we need to make it really obvious. Like often, right? Because I think part of the problem is like, oh, we don't want to bother everybody with some of this conversation necessarily, but if you don't know about the new channel, then now you don't get the opportunity to participate either. So I think we need to be careful about new channels in retrospect.
Cool.
Just so that we don't lose, because that interesting, the question that was discussed right now is very interesting to me. It also seems like in V0 we did have this, or we do have this namespace scoped multi-tenant able catalog sources, but in V1 we've been talking about a lot of cluster scope stuff. So what happens in that V1? What happens in V1? I think that's a pretty interesting discussion. Just so that we don't lose that conversation, maybe it's worth probably bring that up in a more appropriate forum. Maybe it's something that we'll talk about next in the next agenda item too. But I don't want to jump the gun here. I just want to highlight that that's an interesting point, and we should probably keep a note of that to highlight that sometime.
100% on it, and I think the solution is just create a quick issue, right? Maybe we tag it with catalog or something we can kind of filter on, but let's just, why don't we just go create an issue really quickly? Would anyone mind doing that in the background? I'll do it. Once Anik takes over with his presentation. How does that sound, everyone?
Good, thanks.
Perfect. All right, Anik, I believe that you are up with an announcement about catalog sources.
Yes, but this is the V1 catalog sources, right? So in case folks in this meeting aren't aware of this already, because I know Chris Johnson from IBM also joined that. We've been discussing about V1 implementation. So I just pinged design enhancement in the chat that talks about some of the limitations of the V0 catalog source implementations and why we are thinking about re-implementing catalog source for V1. And in the operative framework OLM dev Google group, there was mails sent out that has the recording for the previous meeting in case you missed it. And the enhancement was obviously there. But tomorrow, we've made some progress. There's this prototype I just pinged also in the chat, and we've made some progress in that, and we are thinking about starting the conversation about doing the V1 part of what Ankita just showed right before this, which was in Ankita's demo, it was the V0 catalog source integration. And then we start thinking about starting the V1 integration for catalog sources with operator controller and DEPI and stuff. Basically, everything that Ankita just showed, but with V1 catalog sources, because it won't have the limitation of you also need OLM V0 installed on cluster, or at least the catalog operator. So that meeting is going to be happening tomorrow EST at 9 a.m. We will record it. I heard someone unmute. Was there a question? I guess not. Okay. So yeah, that's basically my announcement. If you have any more questions, again, that channel OLM dev before the meeting is probably the right place to get in touch or start the discussions. I also sent out an email about this, but I thought it's probably worth highlighting it in this meeting too. And that's all I had, Alex, unless anybody has any questions, concerns, suggestions about the meeting tomorrow. Cool.
I think I'm fine. I'm just I can't. Do you know what you titled the email? I can't seem to find it.
Hold on. I have to go to my sent folder. It's OLM.
Oh, I found it.
Yeah. So just for everybody else, it's OLM V1 catalog source design meeting. That's the title. But then the first email was sent Jan 12th. And tomorrow's meeting announcement. So I'm just creating a thread in that. Tomorrow's announcement just went an hour ago.
Perfect. And I've added it to the agenda, today's agenda notes, if anybody wants to. So it's got the meeting link, the password, as well as the time. So 9 a.m. EST. So I will be up bright and early tomorrow. Cool.
Thank you. I'll see you
Oh,
tomorrow. Your time then, Alex.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I'm super excited to see this demo, by the way. It's gonna be great. I'm really excited to see the, catalog source V1 stuff. Wonderful. Okay, so next thing I'm just going to do is I just want to make sure that I captured the core constraints of what, sorry, just closing window, of what Joe wanted to bring up in that ticket. So I'm just going to share this Firefox screen. Everybody see this. So I'm just going to prefix this by saying that, note, this may not be the IDEO repository to file the ticket against, but the catalog, V1 catalog source repository does not exist yet. So this quick disclaimer, and then at Joe, what's your GitHub handle, Joe?
I'm not sure what I have set up there. Is it like my last name?
Well, I'll just mention that.
Yeah, I'll get in there.
The upstream meeting. There are existing OLM. The concern was right. So I'm just going to mention that a concern was raised by existing OLM v0 users that they rely on namespaced scoped catalog sources to restrict the list, restrict available operators for installation for a tenant. Additionally, these tenants may not have cluster scope permissions to create catalog sources in OLM v1. So those. I'll probably format this a little bit, but like the big concerns are like, hey, we need to be able to install. How will users install operators from a specific source, right? So this is kind of the question, right? So how do we limit which catalog content becomes available to particular tenants, right?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much.
How do we limit catalog content to specific tenants? So that's like an open question. One issue I called out is this, like, hey, now that we have a cluster scope resource, will all tenants be able to create these things, right? That's kind of an issue. Something that pair, are you on call? Okay, Pear is not on call, but we'll have I'll just ping him in the upstream channel so that we can talk about this. But Pear is finagling with the idea of supporting multiple catalog source types, right? So like catalog v0 would be one type, catalog v1 would be a type that, Onyx is going to showcase tomorrow. You can imagine that a lightweight dev way of saying like, hey, this is a valid installable operator thing, that would be really cool as well, right? So different ways to say, hey, this is the source. So Pear's been, thinking about this in the background, like, oh, is this something we could do? And he had mentioned he was going to bring it up in this meeting, but we will just do it in the upstream Slack so that we can kind of talk about that. How does that sound? Oh, Joe raised a hand.
Yeah, I think this is a valid conversation to have, but I think it's an even more broad conversation, right? Like the operator API that's used to install operators is at the cluster scope. So the tenant that's going to have the ability to install an operator via a catalog is also at the cluster scope. So you're really just like, we're kind of, I think what the concept really is, the way that OLM v0 worked inside of a namespace, we're now saying that's just going to be how OLM v1 works for the entire cluster. So essentially, like in OLM v0, there was namespace resolution, and in different namespaces, you'd get like basically completely different resolution. You'd have complete different access to catalog sources. other than the global catalog source sources. And now what we're saying is like, well, there's all these reasons that Kubernetes clusters can't really be multi-tenant for operators. We've dealt with the pain of that for the last 3 years. And we've, I think we're rehashing this over and over again at this point, but like, as a result, the idea is OLM v1 is just going to have one global resolution. You can install each operator once. You can scope where that operator is going to have access to do its thing, right? So you could say like, okay, we're going to install the Nginx operator once in the cluster. It's only allowed to do stuff in 3 or 4 namespaces, and then we'll have some RBAC that you can use. But you won't be able to install the Nginx operator in 2 different places, and you won't have 2 separate groups of tenants who are independently installing different sets of operators in different namespaces. Like that whole concept sort of goes away. I don't know if that like is just orthogonal to this discussion, but it seems like it's directly relevant because there's sort of a one-to-one between where, like, what's the API to install an operator, and then what's the API from which that operator is going to be sourcing its bundles.
They seem pretty related to me, Joe.
Yeah, I guess the question is like, is there a use case that we're just not thinking of, which is you say like, okay, yeah, it makes total sense that the operator API is going to be cluster scoped, but I still want different tenants for installing those operators from different sets of catalog sources.
So maybe also add that question with the reason probably everybody is thinking in terms of namespace scoped catalog sources is because that's what exists right now. And the ability to install different or the same operator twice in 2 namespaces exists right in today's world, and therefore is the use case stemming from that, if there is a use case that does come out of that question that you just asked, Joe, or is
yes, it does. I guess for 100% it does. I don't know if you guys have seen what's going on in our world, and maybe we need, I think we just had some kind of a technical review that it was an internal thing, but as far as what we're trying to do, I mean, we have some requirements, tenancy requirements that we need to solve now, essentially, with the old V1 stuff. And this is just my personal opinion. I mean, we're taking advantage of some of the V0 things that are there, like operators in different namespaces, catalogs in different namespaces, so you can have different versions of the same operator and update them separately. I guess the problem I'm wondering about migration. How would we ever get from where V0 is to V1? I don't know.
Yeah, that is a very good question, and one that we're thinking about a little bit, and if others are thinking about it, then great. But I think one thing we're trying to do is, you look at OLM v0 and you're like, man, there's all these warts and there's all these things that like you have to be extremely careful and do things just so, and do things in the right order, and make sure you don't fall into a trap where you get into this permanent failure state and that kind of stuff, right? So we're trying to kind of take a step back and say like, okay, we want to solve all those problems. Solving some of those problems, is probably not like a super straightforward, there's a simple migration. So at least the approach that I've been taking is like, let's get the design right. Like let's sort of understand the limitations of OLM v0. Let's fix them all. Let's get the design right. Let's make something that actually works. And then we have to sort of say like, okay, now that we have what we know is the right thing, what does that actually mean if people want to go from V0 to V1? What I don't want to do is build V1 in such a way that like we know that we'll be able to migrate easily, but to accomplish that, we had to make a bunch of trade-offs that we didn't really want to make otherwise. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I guess I'm just struggling a bit with the investment that we'd be making. I get it. I'm just, when I see these things, it's like 180 from what we're trying to do tactically.
Well,
And
so I mean, from a tactical standpoint, OLM v0 is going to be around for a long time. Maybe like if we're talking about OpenShift, then it's going to be around until it's going to be there for OpenShift v4 forever, probably. If you're talking about upstream, as soon as we get to the point where v1 we're happy with, then, and we've kind of already gotten to this point a little bit, like v0 is sort of in maintenance mode and we're fixing bugs, but we're not really adding new features to it. But I think in terms of like a deprecation window, like from a tactical standpoint, all you've got is v0. v1 won't even be GA probably for another year or two. So like there's nothing super urgent that needs to change from what you guys are doing.
Before we go dig into this anymore, and I'm sorry for cutting off anyone, and I'll give it a chance for people to follow up on me. I just I think this is a bit of a rabbit hole conversation, probably one that might exist better in its own thread or like a Slack thread, and possibly a meeting that we kick off from there with notes.
Yeah. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay, and so I've been so before I say what I've done, does anybody else have anything they want to chime in before I just say what this issue is going to talk about?
I mean, the only thing I'm thinking is, so from a dev perspective, the migration in my head seems like, okay, there are some operators installed via the v0 OLM, and then you just reinstall those operators with v1 OLM. But then it sounds like what Joe said, there is much more than that might be required for migration. So I'd be interested in at least reading something about it, hearing more about it. Maybe that's the avenue for the follow-up thread or meeting or whatever Alex just mentioned. But yeah, I'm very interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, I think if you imagine if your whole cluster has only all namespaces installed operators, that's probably a fairly straightforward migration. If your cluster has the same operator at the same version installed in different namespaces, theoretically, that's also probably pretty straightforward to migrate. You've got some RBAC concerns to worry about there a little bit more, just to figure out where you want the RBAC to go. If you have different versions of the same operator installed in different namespaces, but they just happen to use the same CRD, that very likely will not be migratable unless you repackage those operators as different package names. That's just my off-the-cuff.
Package names or
Hey, Joe.
CRDs APIs as well, right?
So the way that resolution happens, there's an invariant that says, even right now, right? Like you can't install the same package name. You can't install a bundle with the same package name twice in the same context. So like in the same namespace, you can't install two different versions of the cockroach DB operator. In OLM v1, the same thing is going to hold true. You can't install two different versions of the cockroach DB operator, but now resolution happens at the cluster. So you can't even do it in two different namespaces.
Yeah, I think I understand where you guys are going. Yeah, and I'm sorry for derailing the call here. If we capture this and want to somehow kind of walk through it, I'm game.
Awesome. Okay, let's do that. And just to call out some of the things, I said, note, this may not be the ideal repository, but we don't really have a place for it. I said that this may be a byproduct of thinking of the OLM v1 experience based on the OLM v0 experience. And I said, this may also be addressed in the PRD, so we should probably check a double follow up on that. And then I just mentioned in the upstream meeting, there's a concern raised regarding OLM v1's move to cluster scoped catalog sources. And then I explained the problem. Existing OLM v1 v0 users rely on namespace scope catalog sources to restrict installable content available to users. And then it's these open questions. This key part is, how can you limit the set of available catalog sources to a user? How can you limit which available catalog sources are considered when installing an operator? If a user wants to create a catalog source but lacks cluster scope permissions, what can they do? And then finally, I just added a final note. Actually, this might be better included up top. It's just a call out that this whole question may be better explained by just writing a document that outlines the major architectural changes that shift when you move from V0 to V1, right? So it might just be like it is incompatible. That's an opportunity, but that's is why we're going to have this conversation. Does this all seem to capture everything? Any other things we want to
Yeah,
add to
Alex,
this? Yep.
there are a bunch of hands, but just raised already. But then just based off of some of the chat, in case you haven't already seen, it sounds like operator controller. Oh, did everything just get deleted?
Oh, I was going to move it to a discussion.
Okay, so it sounds like a discussion in operator controller is probably the right place. Because I mean it's worth probably looking at the chat at this point. Ben Perez, I think, has this suggestion that this is a higher level conversation. So it sounds, at least to me, like this is probably operator controller is probably the right place for it. So and in case anybody has any other suggestion, I'm free. Yeah, okay. So Joe also agrees, so that's good. So I just probably delete the first two notes.
But
Oh, sorry, the first note, just the first note. Yep.
And I think it's probably just OLM v1 multi-tenancy. Like catalog sources are definitely part of that, but
Right.
It seems like what Joe's asking for is the whole thing, which is totally fair.
Okay, then. Okay, I'll get caught up on this in a second. So, okay, I'm just going to start this discussion and we'll just go. Boom. Oh, that's fun. Look at that. Oh, you guys can. Sorry. Okay, cool. I think we're in a better spot. So, is there anything I was not monitoring the chat as I was typing this up. Is there anything in particular that I need to know that came up in the channel? Okay, basically seems like we need better persona definitions and better use case definitions. I do think the PRD or PDR, I forget which, I forget the TLA, covers some of this, but we can maybe as a follow-up, I'll just update this issue to point to it if there is something that we cover. Okay. Okay, and then I just need a new tab and I need to go to OLM V1. We're going to look at this issue really quickly. So milestone 2, we are in progress. Daniel has been hard at work on getting this stuff over. At the end of the sprint, we will have 2 things that have came out of it. We are going to have a release process for the OLM V1. We have a repo for it called OLM. I think it's OLM V1 releaser. You can look at this. It's a repository. It's captured in this ticket. So it's OLM V1 installer. That's it. So that's going to be a repo that has all the installable stuff. Per had commented that it might make sense to even release Helm charts so that people can install this stuff even easier because it's another avenue for installation, which is always great. We'll see if we tack that on. There's also going to be a new catalog source repository in the operator framework. Then there is going to be a README associated with that. So that may come very quickly, come tomorrow after Onyx presentation. And we'll see where this all lands. Our goal is to have this one finished in the next 3 weeks or so. And we'll see if we can get all of that done in that time. So if anybody wants to jump in, get involved, please try and channel that energy into the milestone 2. And as we, as we finish this off in 3 weeks, next week, we're going to be talking about the upgrade strategy for OLM. We have an idea what that MVP for that might look like. We will discuss that in greater detail with the group, probably after reviewing Todd's work, but the basic idea is that we're going to allow people to set a version field on the operator CR. And if we can just move from one version to another, we at least get one step closer to what an upgrade would look like. And then we can form our opinions from there. So lots of exciting stuff coming through the pipeline. And I believe that covers everything that was on our agenda. I'm going to just add a note that we created that discussion right there. So created a discussion regarding OLM V1 and multi-tenancy. I'll just include the link there. And I believe that's everything that we needed to cover on today. Does anyone have anything else they want to share before we conclude today's meeting? I'm gonna stop my screen share.
Hey, hey, my name is Jay, and I actually have a issue. I'm not sure if it's a right place. I just wanted, I thought the meeting said like the triage will happen here. I posted out the issue in the chat. So is this, if you guys can take a look, that'd be helpful. Or if it's not the right place, I can create this issue somewhere else.
The right place is probably the operator registry repo, but I feel like I've seen, I don't know if it was you or someone else, but I feel like I've seen this question before. Maybe we just dropped the ball on it. But from what I remember, that seems like a reasonable thing for us to do.
Yeah, I think Chris Johnson.
Yeah, probably Chris there, right?
Yeah, quite a while ago.
Yeah, so I'd say we might be able to just move this. I can't remember if it's possible to move it to a different repo, but yeah, I think let's just move that over to the operator registry and we can take a look at it. That should be fairly straightforward. I assume this is just talking about like having a new field in one of the Go structs that includes names such that when you go and unmarshal the data, you got the name populated for you.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that seems okay off the top of my head.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I've transferred that over as requested. It does seem reasonable. So Jay, do you want to make that PR?
Yeah, I can. Well, I have to also check. Yeah, I can try. Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to assign it to you. That's how we should fix all our issues. Okay.
We might need to talk about that one, Jay, but okay.
The upstream and believe that this is a reasonable request. CC at Joe. Actually, does anybody want to volunteer to help Jay along with this, by the way, just so he's not all alone?
I think Jordan already said something in the chat.
Oh. The chat. This is why I need my multi-screens. Okay, so maybe I can.
Yeah, sorry, Alex. I'm dealing with a lot of local noise, and so I was compensating by leveraging the chat.
Okay. I'm just going to show you Jordan. Oh, Croc's fine. That's fine. Volunteered as tribute to help. Okay, cool. So this Stace is in, yeah, so Stace is in the operator registry repo. So just gonna add a note that we looked at, what is this? This issue. Looked at and agreed that this is a reasonable request. Awesome. Okay, I think we're good to go. On that note, does anyone have any last minute things they want to bring up before we conclude today? Fantastic. Well, everybody, thank you again for participating in our upstream meeting. And please, as we move to make sure that all our discussions are happening upstream and that everybody can be included in them, please reach out if you ever feel like you're having difficulty getting involved, and do so on the #OLMDev channel so that we can, address any concerns publicly and make sure that we're doing a great job as stewards. Thank you again for everything, and I will see you all next week.
Thank you.
Oh, reminder, I will be moving the calendar meeting time to the Tuesdays at 11, right? So updated that note. Cool. All right, bye for now.
Hey, Alex, on that note, could you also submit a PR into the community that I think has the meeting times and links and stuff?
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep, I'll do that. I'll do the CNCF calendar, and I will move the fiscal meeting that we have. Cool. All right, and for the final time, everyone, I will see you next week. Bye for now.